Okay, so I have to stop the video and start a new video because of the 15-minute limitation. Okay, so I'm gonna continue where I left off. So basically, I was just saying because maybe kind of like in a way, maybe like just supposedly, because I like if you look at PTTS, like the independent companies that I'm like working on, which is PTTS Planet-wide tournament tip sessions. I'm the founder slash president of the PTTS, so kind of like in a way, and there's a lot of trading card game involvement in the PTTS. So kind of like in a way, it's just like maybe someone just bring up that question, like it's just so kind of like in a way, like I'm just saying like. So, and like, I mean, so kind of like in a way, could, pretty much, like, I think, in kind of like, there's both sides of the argument, one side could argue that it's not that question shouldn't be so hard to answer and things like that, and then another side would argue that like, don't you see all those pioneers who have to embarrass themselves because they can't take the challenge, kind of like in a way. I remember back then I was in the Comic-Con conventions, and at the Pokemon booth there were Pokemon gym leader who still remember about the Pokemon phenomenon on 2000. So pretty much there is, it kind of like it would really be like kind of like in a way, could argue as confusing, someone, brought up the Pokemon phenomenon, which like in a way, it's just like that in general. It's just kind of like it's just really hard to believe there are people who still remember that and things like that. But at the same time, it is the Comic-Con, and it is the Pokemon booth, and it is the Pokemon gym leader. It's kind of like in a way, it's like, then kind of like would argue that maybe that's the reason they still remember about the Pokemon phenomenon back in 2000. I was just saying, and kind of like in a way, felt that, that's why some of the players is who still remember me, like back then, kind of like I have, I'm the regional TM game championship title holder back then, like, these questions is, it's just like I'm being asked weekly, like dealing with these questions is so like, to me it's just like just part of the routine. What's so difficult about these questions is I'm being asked it weekly and things like that. It's like, well, I'm just saying those players can't speak out, because they're not in the Comic-Con, and they're not in the Pokemon booth, and they're not Pokemon gym leader. Maybe those Pokemon gym leaders speak out because they're in Comic-Con and they're in the Pokemon booth and the Pokemon gym leader, and kind of like in a way that's why they could, speak out, that they still remember about the Pokemon phenomenon and back in 2000 and things like that. And so pretty much, these players is, kind of like maybe they did remember me, but how could they speak out? They're just another player and things like that. That kind of like in a way, it's just like, So like, what about like kind of in like primary? What if I just kind of like point it out to in the crowd to that player, like to a few of the player, would kind of like would kind of like in a way, what will happen, with that those players just turn away and start walking away and things like that. It's like, and with the with the crowd able to get together and acknowledge that about the Pokemon phenomenon and things like that. So there's these questions is, would they dare to take that step and acknowledge there was a Pokemon phenomenon back in 2000 and things like that. Kind of like in a way it doesn't have to be in Comic-Con, in the Pokemon booth, and among the Pokemon gym leaders and things like that. So anyway, even though the Pokemon phenomenon did happen, and even though I did deal with these questions as weekly, like as the regional TM game championship title holder in the Pokemon during the Pokemon tournament or after the Pokemon tournament, or like in that period in general, during, like I was just saying, but it's just, how could it's just really hard to bring up those like say those things, it's like, point out about the Pokemon phenomenon and point out that I'm dealing with those questions as weekly and things like that. It's just not something that just, I could just point out and things like that. I don't know. I think the argument is it is vice versa. It is the players who felt that they want to point me out, but I'm the one who's would walk away. Kind of like in a way, it's vice versa. Like I'm not. It's not me who is want to point out those players and they turn away and walk away. It's vice versa. It's those players who want to point me out, but I turn away and walk away. Don't you see all those pioneers who have to embarrass themselves and not able to take the challenge? Anyway, I just have to pause the video after I make that comment about. After I made that comment, I have to pause the video because it's really heated up comment. Okay, so anyway, so pretty much, it's just, if you're really pushing the pioneer too much, they're gonna say something back. It's like, who you guys think you are? You're just some players in the Pokemon tournament and things like that. It's like, and then like then you have like an argument going on. What some play you're talking about? You're talking to the regional TM game championship title holder. It's not just some player and things like that. Usually, and then kind of like in a way, as title holder, I should be able to see this argument, these argument back and forth miles away. It's like, anyway, I have to keep making pauses on these after I make these comments is because just really heated up comments is. Well, pretty much like it's just all of a sudden, it's like this commotions like created because of just one question that's being asked to me. It's like back on 1999, if I could go back to 1999, how would I make that decision again and things like that. Just one question and stir up all this commotion and everything. Well, I mean, probably like, I think the argument is probably like the security guards and everything probably really maintain the situation and let me able to say what I need to say without all the interruption and things like that. I felt like maybe that could be the argument, you know. It doesn't have to create all these commotions with, you know, like just all these people who just have these urges to have to speak out and things like that. And anyway, like I was just saying, so pretty much, you know, like it was just all start out with just one question. And it's like, if I could go back in time to 1999, how would I make my decision on my commitments to the trading card game tournament? You know, it's just like that one question stir up all these commotion and everything. Okay, so anyway, okay, so I'm just gonna pretty much this whole video was just because of that one question. Like I was pretty much at the beginning, at the opening of the video, that's what I was pointing out, that this kind of right away, you know, I was pointing out that it was just what kind of like in a way that it's all because of just to answer this question, this one question. Okay, so anyway, thank you for watching PTTS. Thank you for following PTTS. I'm gonna end this video in 3, 2, 1.